Yeah, super, super kind. But thank you all so much for being here. And thank you all for dropping the chat where you're coming in from. Really, really cool to see kind of the wide array. And also for the folks that took the time when we did the registration to just throw some questions out there. That was super helpful for me in kind of informing, shedding light on this whole process. And I'm really, really passionate about shedding light on this process. I went through it blind. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I'm formerly incarcerated. And so and I also don't have a single bone in my body that's interested in gatekeeping kind of any aspect of this process. And so we'll go through the presentation. I'm going to do my best to be really, really thorough, but I don't want y'all to listen to my voice for 30 minutes. I really want to open it up and have it be a little bit more interactive. Um, but I say all that to maybe start by saying, I'm happy to share my experience. I'm kind of the expert of my lived experience, but I'll do my best to shed light on maybe some things are kind of unique to my situation, and you might have some different considerations. But also some things that you can kind of expect no matter what experiences or background you've had. Some other things I'll note, I'm at UCLA Law. I love it. I think incredibly highly of it as a university and as a law school. But that's because it's the best fit for me. I want sincerely everyone to find a law school that's the best fit for them. So don't feel like you can only ask me questions about UCLA. I went through the admissions process. I got to know a ton of different schools. There are a ton of schools I also think incredibly highly of, particularly for folks that are system impacted and formerly incarcerated. There are some law schools that do a really, really great job supporting us. Um, yeah, so with that, and maybe one more kind of disclaimer off the top. So happy to share. I'm going into my final year of law school, which is crazy. And happy to share about like the experience of law school. Like I know people have probably maybe heard about what the first year is like or what like summer jobs are like and all that. Happy to talk about that maybe one-on-one if you guys hit me up. But I think just for the purposes of this one, I want everyone to leave the call feeling really confident that they can apply to law school successfully and get in, rather than talking about kind of the really exciting next steps of once you've gotten there, what law school is actually like. But if that's something that you came here to really hear, then we can absolutely talk about that during the Q&A. But with that, we'll get started. I'll share my screen. I could just get a thumbs up if folks are able to see the presentation. Awesome. Thank y'all. Okay, so this is kind of a disclaimer I had up top. So I was incarcerated for about 4 years as a juvenile in my home state of North Carolina from ages 11 to 16. My first offense ever. I really, really got the book thrown at me. Pretty much everyone going through the legal system that time did. And of course, as you can imagine, that shaped my entire life, the way that I think of things, the fact that I went to college, let alone law school, let alone grad school, is something I thought that I'd never be able to do. But I say all that to say, I'm very kind of cognizant of some of the differences between the legal system in California or if you've had experiences elsewhere in my home state. I'm also very cognizant that it's quite different going through the legal system as a youth versus an adult in a lot of different ways. I won't ever compare them. There's something to be said about like when you're still growing up and developing what it's like to kind of have the experiences of trauma in a lockdown facility, but it doesn't mean that it's any better because you're an adult. But also the way that records are dealt with. Juvenile records are often sealed, but sometimes they can be accessed versus adult records in which you have to go through the expungement process. I really do want to know that I can be super supportive no matter what stage you're in, but my own experience was that I went through it as a youth and in North Carolina. Um, but I will also say up top, maybe I'll actually go on to this slide really quickly. Know that you're not alone at all. I wasn't alone when I entered, and I'm really excited to kind of lend a hand back. But there's so many folks who are system impacted and formerly incarcerated that are lawyers. There's very, very much a path forward everywhere, but particularly in California. Maybe in California more so than anywhere else. And the California System Law Bar Association was my first intro to that. incredible amount of attorneys who are, again, system impacted and formerly incarcerated, who will give their time to tell you exactly what that process is like. I think things look a little different for us, as you can imagine, but I also think that people are quite fearful that this path is not open to you whatsoever, and that is not true. And that doesn't matter the level of offense. There are folks with offenses that are deemed quite serious that also can make it. Again, things might look a little bit different in terms of your character and fitness and going up for the bar, two things that we'll talk about today. But in terms of it just absolutely not being an option for you, that's not the case, at least here in California. And so I hope that I convince you all of that by the end of the presentation. But backing up a little bit. Something I also want to say up top. So I didn't go to law school directly out of undergrad. I actually didn't want to go to law school for a very long time. Y'all might be able to relate to this, but my only touch point with the law was kind of through policing and a really, really terrible defense attorney and a really, really good prosecutor and an awful judge. Those are my references for the law. I had zero interest in being like any of them. And so I started thinking about what are other ways to really give back to my community and help the people I want to help without being a lawyer. And I still hold today. It took me a while to get around to realizing that I did want to be a lawyer, but I still hold today that being a lawyer is not the only way to affect change. You can absolutely do it in these other realms, and oftentimes these other realms actually have a lot more leeway to do to make really significant, long-lasting change than the law does. The law is slow moving. The law is really rigid. The law is gatekept by a largely white and male profession that we're trying to change, but it's also changing really, really slowly. And so I think I hear a lot of folks say, I want to be a lawyer because I want to get back to my community. And I really, really do want to drive home that it is one way, it is not the only way. Being an educator, whether that's like through being a teacher or through a nonprofit group or through an after school group, is incredibly powerful. Being an advocate on the ground, organizing, community building, anything in healthcare, anything in social work. And then maybe the one that I want to drive home right now is policy, because I think I talk to a lot of folks who are really, really interested in policy. I am too. Um, and law school is actually not good at teaching you policy. It's actually kind of not the purpose of law school, which we can talk about. Um, you can absolutely do policy after law school. Many people in the policy space do had gone to law school, but policy as like a subject is actually like very this is how you take something from an idea to something that is actually kind of put in place and implemented. And that's not what law is for. Law is kind of an after the fact. This is something that happened, and this is how we remedy it. And so I would tell people that are interested in policy to give an MPP, a Master of Public Policy degree, or a Master of Public Affairs degree a look. They're going to be shorter. They often are going to be more accepting in terms of your application, and they're also going to give you the specific policy skills to go out and affect policy in that way, in a way that law school just doesn't. All right, so we'll talk about a couple things. Again, like I said, we're going to stay on the front end in terms of like all the things that you're thinking about before you actually get into law school, which I'm certain that every single person on this call will do. Um, and so we'll talk about kind of the networks that you can utilize, and already know that me, Gio, Maritza are already a part of it. I'm super happy. You'll have my contact info. I do this all the time. I'm super happy to work with folks as they're crafting their applications, their materials, and thinking through everything. I genuinely love to do it. We'll talk about how you choose schools and build your list. I know a lot of people are, quite frankly, just really afraid of the LSAT. Super valid. I'm so happy I never have to take it again. We can talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about personal statements, which is my personal, but particularly for folks that are system impacted or formerly incarcerated, like this. I want to be careful because I don't ever want to like make it sound like you're selling your story in order to get into law school. But this is really the one thing that can move the needle in a way that 90% of the people that you're applying against can't say. And so I think a lot of people will spend all their time really stressing about the LSAT. I get it, I do. Um, But I really, really think that for kind of once in this whole messed up system, the ball's in our court more than ever when it comes to our personal statements. And so taking time to really, really refine that, also talking to people like me who know what a law school is looking for, I really think that that pays off. I think that I'm at UCLA, and I think that I got to Stanford because of my personal statement. People are like, nah, I'm a very middle of the road student. But I think that my personal statements have always been really strong. We'll talk about character and fitness. So this is effectively uh, the part of law school applications as well as the part of the bar. And for folks that are still getting their lay of the land, the bar exam is the big exam that you take after law school in order to be able to practice as an attorney. Every state has their own. And a big part of that's the test, but another part of that is what they call character and fitness, which is where they're effectively assessing, like, do you have the ethics to be a lawyer? And so we'll talk a little bit about what does that look like to go through that process as somebody who perhaps has a record. And then similar to that, we'll talk about what an addendum is that's a part of your law school application. So with that, we'll keep trucking along. We have a lot to cover, but I'm really excited to again lay the foundation for this stuff. This is again going to be recorded, so don't stress too much about if there's something that you hear and you don't know. You guys have the chance to reach out to me. You guys have the chance to dig a little bit deeper. But I want you all to walk away at least knowing all the things that you should have an eye to. So again, talking through support networks. I'm with the Bruin Underground Scholars at UCLA. Every UC campus has one. A ton of you all I know are part of your respective campuses. UC Scholars Program. Community colleges have a similar program called Rising Scholars. And so while they're not dedicated to getting you into law school, they're dedicated to getting you kind of where you want to go and make sure that you're successful as a student. And so we're all super closely connected, and they will absolutely, if they don't have the answers, which you might very well be surprised, there are more and more formerly incarcerated folks going to law school every year. But if they don't have the resources, they'll absolutely connect you to someone who does. So that's a great place to start. We talked a little bit about the California State involved or California System Involved Bar Association. Um, and really quickly, we can talk a little bit about the differences in schools as you guys start thinking about where you'd like to be. Before I talk about accreditation, maybe I'll kind of dispel a myth that I hear up top, which is that you need to go to school in the place where you want to practice. I think that's very school dependent. And by practice, I mean be a lawyer. I think it's very school dependent, but for the most part, people recognize that learning the law is a really powerful thing, and being a lawyer is a really big accomplishment. And so they're not going to necessarily say because you learned the law in California, you aren't applicable to be a lawyer in New York. Um, there are all these different kind of moving things, but for example, UCLA, we send the bulk of our students into LA as well as Southern California. A lot of our students go to Northern California as well, but our next biggest cohort actually goes to New York City. And then after that, our next biggest cohort goes to Washington, D.C. I'm in Chicago this summer at a civil rights law firm doing really incredible work. And me being at UCLA was absolutely a benefit to me coming here. And so I know that people have family ties. I know that there are lots of financial considerations, absolutely. But if you're ruling out schools elsewhere, um, just because you think that there'd be no path for you to come back to California if that's what you want to do, there absolutely is. So talking a little bit about the different types of school, the vast majority of schools are what we call ABA approved. The ABA is the American Bar Association. So they do kind of everything law school. They're also the ones that administer that big bar exam. Um, and so most schools are ABA approved. Then in California, we have some that are kind of this middle spot that are California accredited, which means after you finish them, you'll be able to sit only for the California bar. So like our students at UCLA that go to New York or go to DC, you wouldn't qualify for those positions, but anything in California, you would. So that often is a great option for folks who perhaps want to do part-time programs. There are very, very few ABA approved part-time programs in the US, but there are quite a few California part-time ones. Um, and similarly, unaccredited, again, you only would be qualified to have a job in California, which works for quite a few people. They often are much more accepting when it comes to LSAT scores and undergraduate GPA. Um, the only thing that is a big hurdle is you have to take what we call the baby bar. Y'all might have heard Kim Kardashian has failed it, I think, 7 times now. But we're rooting for her. Maybe the eighth is it. It is a hard test. It is a hard test that no other law students at the California accredited or the ABA approved schools have to take. And so that is something worth considering. I should also say you'll realize that quite a few opportunities out there are limited to students that are at ABA approved schools. Quite a few jobs will say we only want a student that's at an ABA approved school. Quite a few schools will not allow you to transfer in from an unaccredited or a California accredited school. They only want students who are transferring from another ABA approved school. So I'll say outright, you should definitely try your best to apply to as many of the ABA approved schools as possible. But if it's something financial or something with your schedule or what have you, giving the California credit school isn't a bad idea. Yeah, we'll talk briefly about the LSAT. I won't get into necessarily test taking strategies. Um, it's also changed in the recent years. I'll say two things. I'll say three things. The first is that it sucks. It does. And it's not meant to be kind of like for folks that have taken perhaps the ACT or the SAT. It's not meant to be a test that you come in with all this background knowledge. It's not. It's meant to be a test that you sit down and study for and take time. And it's very, very true that the folks that aren't working, don't have families, perhaps are much younger, they tend to have more time than folks that do have families, do need to work, are a little bit older and supporting themselves. And so that's where you see the biggest. I hate this idea that the folks that are scoring the highest is because they're the smartest. No, it tends to be just because they had more money to start with and could take more time to study. That said, and we'll talk about support programs on the back end. Um, both things are true. Your LSAT score is not everything. And I think that there are people that will tell you that it is. I think that it probably is true for folks who have not had another life experience. And I'm really, really not trying to, to be shady. But I think you'll have quite a few peers. They're really great. They're really intelligent. They had incredibly stable upbringing. And when they're in a pile of applications, there's really nothing to differentiate them from the next student that had a really, really great upbringing and went to UCLA for undergrad. And those folks don't, they're really great, but they often don't have much to talk about in their resume or their personal statement. And so the LSAT is very much that way for them to stand out. I don't think that that's true of anybody that's on this call. I think that you all have very, very valid experiences, very unique experiences, very unique takes on the law, the power of the law, your role in the law, your ability to advocate. And so while the LSAT will still be a part of your application, it's not going to be the one that takes precedent. And I say that whether you get a great score or a score that's lower than you had hoped. I really do believe that. So I'll say. Uh, and we'll talk about how you guys can scope out law schools, but every law school publishes its median LSAT score as well as its median undergrad GPA. And they do. They get higher every single year. I think UCLA's this year is like 172. And for folks that are still wearing the LSAT, the highest you can get is a 180. The average score of all law students is 150, all LSAT takers. And so I really do hate it when I'm talking to someone and they're like, I got a 155 and I feel like the failure. 150 is the average. But when you get into higher ranked schools, the average is often in the median is often in the 170s. I say this because I hear a lot of people both thinking and getting the advice that you should not apply to a school in which your LSAT or your GPA is below the median. That's like false for quite a few reasons, but the biggest is because that's not how math works. Median means when you take everybody that got admitted into the school, that is the number that's in the middle. So it means that half the people got a score that's higher than that. That's true. But it also means half of all the students at UCLA got a score lower than that. And so I hate this idea that you're not supposed to apply if you don't have that score. That's just so wrong. I'll also say, not to put anyone's business out there, but I have friends, whether it's at UCLA or Georgetown. There are some schools that I do get the sense are very LSAT sensitive, namely the ones you would expect, Harvard and Yale and Stanford. But incredible schools like Northwestern, WashU and St. Louis, these other very, very phenomenal law schools. I have friends that are upwards of 20 points below the LSAT median. So that would put them or in like the low 150s, who are incredible students. And I hate the idea that they wouldn't have applied to those schools had they taken that advice, but I'm so happy that they didn't because they're there, they're thriving. I also think that they had really great personal statements, similar to what everyone else on the call will have. And so, absolutely do your best. I also know that the LSAT is expensive. I really do think if you can both schedule wise and financially really plan on taking it a second time, almost everyone sees a big increase that second time just by virtue of having sat through it. And so that would be my advice. And then the final thing that I'll say, and again, I'm happy to one-on-one talk a little bit more about strategy, is while it's very true that perhaps LSAT lower than you'd hope won't necessarily bar you from admissions, it is very true. I know folks are financial aid conscious that that LSAT does have perhaps the single greatest bearing on how much financial aid you get. And so you can absolutely get in with perhaps a lower score, but the most financial aid is reserved for folks that have very, very high LSAT scores, which, if you remember what I was saying earlier, feels kind of pointless because often the folks that get 180s are the ones that have the family support to take an entire year off and study anyway. And so they don't necessarily need the money in the way that somebody that's working two jobs and studied in their free time did what little free time they had, but at least right now, that's kind of how financial aid works. Doesn't mean that you won't get any, but when you're thinking about LSAT, think about it as I want the best score that I can get, not necessarily because I need to get in, but because I want to get as much money as I can. All right, so going to speed it up a little bit so we have more time for questions, but I really do want to take some time to talk about personal statements because again, I think that this is really what moves the needle the most. This is where I see folks uh, who are otherwise really, really incredible candidates kind of stumble a little bit because it is a big ask. It is, I don't want to sell my story. I don't want to use this as a diary page, but I also very much want to get into law school. And so it's doing that kind of dance. I think some high level pieces of advice I have for folks as they think about their personal statement. One, I think kind of the biggest, what I call like the cardinal sin of personal statements is what I call resume regurgitation. It's where you just rewrite everything that's on your resume. They have like so few pieces of your application to get a clear picture of who you are. And so to use one to basically say what another already says, it doesn't serve you too well. And so like even things specifically because you have such a limited amount of space, even things like during my freshman year at UCLA, they knew you were a freshman at UCLA. They have your transcript and they have your resume. You can save some words by just saying during my freshman year. Um, there's all the stuff that they already know about you. Tell them something that they don't know about you from your resume or from your a transcript. You can tie it in for sure, but like use this as a place to tell a story. Um, some other things I'll say is I'm sure that you all will consider applying to multiple law schools. You don't have to rework your personal statement for every law school, but you do want to think about having just one paragraph that's tailored to that law school. You definitely don't want to send the same document to every single one. I think I had just one paragraph that, I always say, y'all are my top choice. I told that to like all 10 schools. But I would pick, maybe a professor that I really, really love there, a clinic or a class that I really want to take. And then I was really big on, I'm not just going to the law school, I'm going to that campus. So I identified things at that campus that I really, really liked. I'm pretty sure I talked about the having an underground scholars chapter. I really I love sociology, and so that's not the degree that I was going to get, but I wanted to go to a school that had a good department because I wanted to be able to learn from them. Thinking, really sitting back and picturing what will my life look like if I go to UCLA Law, if I go to USC Law, like what classes would I take? What would I do every day? Is there a club I would join? Is there some professor I really, really want to work with? And just taking a paragraph and really painting that picture. Um, and maybe the final thing I'll say regarding personal statement is another maybe trap that I think people fall into, and this kind of goes against what I was just saying, is I think people spend a lot of time talking about how good of a student they are, or how good of a student they've been, how good of a student they will be. I think you can definitely write a great personal statement that way, but I think what's really stronger is to get your mind into what kind of lawyer you would be. That's the purpose of law schools, is to train lawyers. And I definitely think everyone on this call has probably given some thought into what a good lawyer looks like and what a bad lawyer looks like, perhaps more so than a lot of your classmates that haven't come into contact with the legal system. And so, really taking some time to say, I want to go to this law school because it will prepare me to be the kind of lawyer that I want to be. Like, kind of skipping past the student phase and really, really thinking about what comes next. I think those personal statements are really, really strong. Right, we'll go on. Just a couple more things we'll talk about. We talked a little bit about financial aid. Happy to keep talking more, and I don't want to brush over it. That's a huge, huge concern. It's scary. I pretend like my loans don't exist. But what we can absolutely talk about, maybe the two things that I'll drive home here are on the front end, fee waivers. If you guys have looked at applications, they're expensive. They range anywhere from $50 to $90 for each application just to the school. And then LSAC, that's LSAC, it's the company that kind of compiles all your stuff, are the biggest scams in the game. But they will also charge you $45 to send your transcripts to the school, which is, I don't know about y'all, but I could do that for free. And so they also get a lot of your money. That said, schools hand out fee waivers like candy. It's actually really crazy. At UCLA, if you go on a tour with us, and that's I give tours, they're really great. I encourage folks to do them. We have in-person tours every Monday and Friday, but even on our virtual tours, so that's when you log on to a Zoom call like this on Wednesdays, just by virtue of attending those, you get a fee waiver, so you don't have to pay the application fee. A ton of schools do that. They also kind of keep track of your name. It's called expressing interest, which is a really big deal, particularly if they're thinking of through a few candidates, which to be a little bit upfront with kind of the situation that we're all in, being formerly incarcerated, I think that they'll always kind of think really hard about our applications. And so anything moves the needle, and one of the things is expressing interest and going on a tour. But it also will get you a fee waiver. Anytime LSAC holds a fair, so they hold like two a year. Some of you may have been. They're often in like big convention centers in it's not just LA area law schools, but every law school in the country will send out representatives. Just by going and talking to their table, they'll give you a fee waiver. So that's a great way to save a lot of money. I think I applied to 10 law schools, and I think I paid the application fee for two. The other eight I got waived. And the last thing that I'll leave y'all, maybe two. Um, I mentioned a little bit earlier that your LSAT is very much tied to the amount of aid you get. It's very different than undergrad, in which um, aid is really tied to need. So they're asking like for your financial information, perhaps your family's financial information. They're giving you money that way. Law school doesn't really do that. Unfortunately, law school really ties how much money they give you to pretty much how much they want you to come. And oftentimes it's the 4.0, 180 LSAT students that they're giving a lot of money to convince to come. Whereas the students perhaps with a lower LSAT or a lower GPA, they realize it's a huge deal for you to get into UC Berkeley. And so they're like, you're gonna come anyway. I kind of hate that. But that said, there are external scholarships. I've gotten about to date about $50,000 worth of external scholarships, which are incredibly helpful. And what is nice in law school is that, unlike in undergrad, where they kind of send that check to your school and then your school takes its cut and then gives you the rest, In law school, that check goes directly to you. Everyone understands that like living expenses are part of surviving law school. And so nobody is saying this needs to be spent on books, this needs to be spent on something related to school. If the biggest need that you have right now is, say, to get a car, that's a living expense. You can absolutely use those funds to do that. If you really need to pay rent, you can absolutely do that. It's nice in that regard that they treat you more of an adult with some autonomy over your money. That's happy to talk more about. I know that that's stressful, and we could spend an entire segment talking about it, particularly with the changes under the Trump administration around borrowing. Happy to go into detail about that. I'm also happy to talk about the public service loan forgiveness, which is effectively if you go into public service, you'll pay your loans for 10 years, and after 10 years, the rest will be forgiven. That's what quite a few students, like myself included, are banking on doing. That is, maybe we'll spend just the last few minutes and then I'll open it up talking about character and fitness. And so I don't know how far folks along are, but you'll see when you get to the official applications for schools, all of them will have a character and fitness section. And perhaps the most frustrating thing is that none of them are the same. So you can't really write one statement and give it to everyone. Everyone asks different things, particularly if you're applying to schools in different places in the country. Like some I remember really well were like any point of contact with the law. And so I remember having friends that were trying to dig up past parking tickets. That's on the extreme end. But there's some, like I had maybe four schools that wanted me to disclose even my juvenile records. I had maybe six schools that said very explicitly, you don't have to. There were schools that said even if it was expunged or sealed, you need to disclose. I'm a hard believer that because it's expunged or sealed, that's none of your business. But there are also schools that were like, you don't have to. But the school should, on that application, tell you exactly what they're expecting you to disclose. And I do encourage you to listen. You don't have to lie, but don't give them anything that they didn't ask for. Give them exactly what they asked for. And what they will do is they'll give you a section, it's called an addendum, in which you can explain what happened. And this is also kind of an interesting thing, particularly for folks who have maybe gone through the expungement process and know what a declaration looks like. It's much more similar to that than this kind of essay in which you're explaining everything. That's not really what they're looking for there. Um, they're really looking for, yeah, again, like a declaration. This happened on this date, and this is the outcome, and maybe just a line or two saying, what the circumstances were then and how it will be different now. It's actually much more cut and dry. There are examples of this out there. I'd love to talk to folks, but it's not necessarily the space to really, really talk about kind of how that experience has shaped you. That stuff belongs more in your personal statement. Um, but I'll say about kind of that character and fitness addendum. One, it won't be the thing that bars you from getting into law school. This is almost just a like I don't want to say liability, but it is. The school needs to have it on record that you have this experience on the very, very off chance that something happened in the past. The school doesn't want to be like, we didn't know. But so often, this doesn't even go to the committee that's making the admissions decision. It's purely an administrative thing. Um, but yeah, we can talk more about kind of what that format looks like, but it's less narrative and more kind of a cut and dry kind of thing. I also will offer, I had mentioned that you want to maybe talk a little bit about the circumstances then and what's changed now. I also think this trips up folks a little bit. You want to give a good amount of thought. Of course, always be honest, but I know that a lot of people will say something to the effect of, I had experienced a lot of stress or perhaps a loss in the family. All that stuff is really, really valid, 100% valid. The law school will potentially read that as, so if you experience a lot of stress or you experience a lot of loss in the family during law school, you're telling me that you would, again, get into contact with the law. And so you really want to be kind of cautious about the reasons that you give for your first experience, and if that's something that could happen again. I see this also with folks that are perhaps going through substance use disorder. They'll say these things are what caused me to use that substance. I've been clean for this long, and that should be the story. Um, but if those things that kind of cause you to start in the first place pop back up, the school's going to be like, well, what's to stop you doing it again? And so don't give them that kind of ammunition to kind of doubt your progress. Make sure it's very, very clear that that was a chapter in your life, and you are moving past it, and that you can absolutely overcome whatever things you had some difficulty with in the past. But again, do so pretty succinctly if you can. So that's these are all the things that I was saying. And so yeah, I'll leave it here. There's a lot of really incredible pre-law programs. Some of them are they'll have like a LSAT floor, a GPA floor, but a lot don't. I think really highly of all of them, but in particular, a System Lift and Leap, and as well as UCLA Law Fellows. That's housed at UCLA. Almost all of them include LSAT prep, so you're not doing that alone, exposure to law schools and law teaching. And then all these on your resume is a huge bonus and kind of telling the law school that you've given a lot of thought to law school, you're part of a pre-law community, and that you would be knowing what you're getting into. So the recording, it's recorded. I definitely encourage folks to look through all of these and to throw in an application.
Thank you, Michael. And I want to give an opportunity for Gio, one of our student staff, to kind of just share a little bit about any of the resources he tapped into here at UCLA or any support he got as he's navigating and applying for law school. Gio, you're welcome to introduce yourself, share a fun fact, and then expand a little bit more about the resources you tapped into.
Okay, real briefly, my name is Ronnie Hernandez. I am currently communications and correspondence intern at the Berlin Underground Scholars here at UCLA. And I'm currently, well, fun fact about me, I'm currently studying for the LSAT, and it's going. It is a difficult task, but one that I was definitely inspired and motivated to pursue through the UCLA Law Fellows program. I got accepted earlier this year. It runs for several sessions, around 7 sessions throughout a few months, and that is one program that definitely I tapped into because I heard a lot of great things about it, and just the people there, the community, the networking, and just the resources and information provided through them was essential, was pretty much pivotal in my decision to pursue law school. I was on the fence about law school, and however, through the support I received through the Law Fellows program, I was able to make a decision to go all in. I recently graduated from UCLA, so now all my dedication and time is spent on studying for the LSAT and eventually um, take the um, take the LSATs this coming October. These are all great programs, and but I would highly advise anyone to uh, definitely pursue all of these. UCLA Law Fellows, I mean, I was part of it, so definitely I am biased, but it's one of the greatest programs I've been a part of.
Awesome. Thank you for that,
Thank you.
Gio. I'm gonna stop sharing now, then for folks, and then we're gonna let me stop recording.